Good morning. This is my series on the World Championship from 2014, played in Sochi, Russia, between defending champion Magnus Carlsen and challenger Vishy. They won a game each early on, and then there was a series of draws, and then in the sixth game, Magnus just about managed to win in a game in which both sides had chances. Vishy didn't see his chances, and Magnus didn't need to be asked twice. Then there was a whole series of draws more until we come to game number 11. So Magnus had won 2, Vishy had won 1, and there'd been 8 draws. So that meant that Magnus, with his 8 draws, 4 points, and his 2 wins, 2 points, 6 points, needed just 1 point more to win the match. So 2 draws would be enough for him, or 1 win would be enough for him. So let's see what happens. E4, E5. Oh, I'll just get rid of the analysis. Knight F3, Knight C6, Roy Lopez, and the Berlin defense, and Carlsen castles. This, for some reason, the real gambit, some reason I don't really understand. Who I'm no expert, the real gambit isn't called a gambit until it is accepted. When the pawn is accepted, it's the real gambit accepted. But if he just doesn't take and does something else, why isn't it the real gambit declined? But it isn't. It's just the real gambit accepted. And he plays d4 to break up in the centre. The knight goes back and threatens the bishop. The bishop takes the knight. This is the Lerme variation. The pawn takes and the pawn takes, chasing the knight away. The knight comes to f5 and the queen is taken. And this is called Lerme. This is the actual Berlin Wall variation of the Berlin defense of the Roy Lopez. And I know I talked in the game the other day, which was on the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, but to be completely technically correct, there is a variation of the Berlin defense in the Roy Lopez, which is called the Berlin Wall defense, and this is it. This is the Berlin Wall defense, which is a sideline in the Lerme defense, which is a sideline in the Rio Gambit accepted. But if we look at the position now, they've got 7 pawns apiece, and they've both got 1 piece out. It's Carlsen to move. Anand's king looks a little weak on the d8 square, but it often proves very difficult to do anything about it. And you might think that the best thing for Carlsen to do would be to say check on e1, but there are well-known on d1. There are well-known antidotes to this plan. So he plays instead h3, partly to take control of the g4 square and partly to support the pawn push g4 when he comes to it. Pawn comes to d7, and the knight is developed. The pawn comes to h6, and the pawn comes out so that the bishop can be fianchetted. King comes to c8. Again, you might think, well, that king's really in the way for that rook, but actually, when he plays b6, the king comes to b7. It's perfectly safe there. The rooks are connected, and you know it's a decent game for black. It's a very, very drawish position actually. I just play bishop to b2, and the pawn comes to c5. And if we just look at the analysis, we'll see that a quarter of a pawn advantage for white. It's a drawish, very, very drawish position. And Carlsen is happy in this drawish position because 2 draws will give him the championship. It's not him that needs to win. It's Anand, and Anand needs to push from this. I won't say poor position, but from this drawish position, Anand needs to try and push for a win. Why can't he wait and push for a win in his last game, where he has the white pieces? because Carlsen is too good a defender to be beaten. He can easily control that into a drawn endgame with the black pieces. So c5, and the rook comes to d1. Perfect position. Pawn comes to b6, and now Carlsen's ready to play king to b2 and king to b7. Sorry, and move his bishop. Everything's developed nicely. And Carlsen's rook takes the other central file. Why not? Bishop comes to e6. This is as much about stopping the pawn from coming to e6 as it is about taking possession of that diagonal with his unopposed light squared bishop. Knight comes to d5 and the pawn comes to g5. It's supported and the king comes to b7. The king comes to h2 and the pawn comes to a5. a4 stops any further advance and the knight retreats to e7. If he takes it, Anand will take back and will have completed his development and maybe saved himself a move by doing so. So Carlsen plays g4 so that the knight isn't going back to f5. The knight comes to g6 and the king comes to h3. Yeah. The bishop finally develops and both sides have completed their development and we're now into middle game manoeuvring. The knight comes to d2, looking to come to e4 and then f6 possibly. If we can get a knight established on f6, then there will not be winning chances for Anand, who plays his rook into the middle, and Carlsen goes ahead with that plan. The knight comes out of the way to stop the swap off occurring, and the knight comes to f6. It's really, really difficult for Anand to create winning chances here, but he really tries. He really gives it a good go. b5, yeah, bishop comes to c3 to threaten this pawn. Pawn is taken, and the king comes to c6 to threaten the knight, but mostly to open up the b file for the rook. The rook comes to f3, and the king comes to f3, and the rook comes to b8. Carlsen heads to e5, and maybe at some point in time he's thinking of playing f4. If it gets taken, he takes with the knight, and if it's taken, he takes with the knight, and then breaking up the kingside pawn structure. b4 from Anand. Yeah, a very, very brave attempt to sacrifice the exchange for the opportunity to create winning chances. The computer prefers the move b3, and if we look at the analysis, it says plus 2.2, 0.22 to white. It would have been plus 0.36 to black had he played b3. I don't think that's really enough to win. And yeah, I don't think plus 0.22 to white is good enough for but he's, come on, you got to give the guy credit. He's sacrificing the exchange for some nebulous positional compensation. So it's taken, and the pawn takes, and yeah, now you can see he's got a free pawn, and maybe can push that all the way home. Maybe it's worth something. The knight comes to h5, maybe he's thinking about coming to h3, g3, e2, and d5. King comes to b7, pawn. So he's trying to break up the position, and he takes with the knight which is furthest away from the centre. This makes sense. It's taken back, and the knight takes back, abandoning the c pawn. So now Anand has two passed pawns, but if we look at the analysis, it's now slightly more in favour of white. Two pawns in favour of white, despite the fact that he has 6 pawns against 4, 2 pawns for his exchange. But he still has to find the correct moves. the rook comes to d7, and the rook comes to a6, and the knight comes to d5, the knight comes to c6. Pawn takes, bishop comes here, and a great move now by Carlsen to like put an end to the nonsense, if you will. He plays rook takes. Of course, check, trying to take the rook. So he takes, and obviously, if he takes the knight, then the rook comes here, and both bishops are threatened. So he gets a bishop back, and he's playing again with a rook against the bishop. But no, he's got 4 pawns against 3, so he's won 2 pawns in this exchange. Obviously, he doesn't take it, and Carlsen plays to b5. Bishop takes and king takes. And now, yeah, it's 3 pawns against 3 pawns, and bishop against knight, but the key is that this pawn is probably too difficult for Anand to stop. Carlsen pushes, Anand pushes. I think when it comes down to Anand's pawns are more stoppable than Carlsen's. But he does a double. He moves all the way for the rook, so the pawn can come to e7, where it has to be taken by the bishop to prevent it from becoming a new queen. And he comes nearer to the passed pawns of Anand so that he can fight against them. Bishop comes to e7, and he pushes the pawn. Doesn't that mean he can just take it? Yeah, but if he just takes it, then the pawn comes to e7 and he has to exchange. And alright, he gets 2 pawns for his bishop, and he's suddenly got 3 pawns against 1. But the king is near enough, and with the help of the king, the rook will stop this pawn, and this pawn will eventually fall, and this pawn might well queen. So he can't afford to take that, so he comes to a4. But the pawn comes forward and swaps, and now the situation is the same. If he takes the pawn, the pawn pushes, comes to e7. But he pushes to a3, but the king is now moved over, and the king can stop these 2 pawns alone. So yeah, and the bishop can't stop these pawns. The bishop at some point in time has to give itself up for one of these pawns, because if he doesn't take this pawn now, then the pawn comes here, and then the pawn comes here. Okay, Anand can come here with the bishop, but then one of the pawns goes, he takes the one, and the other one goes and becomes a new queen. So nothing left to fight for. So he resigned, and with a game to spare, Carlsen has 7 points and is uncatchable, and manages to defend his World Championship title for the first time. So don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe to my videos. Thanks. Bye.